Welcome to the Writer Center Virtual Craft Chat, where we talk a little less about what you wrote, a little more about how you wrote it. Meg Eden Kuyatt, I'm so glad to have you here talking about Good Different. Can you please start us off by reading a few pages from this book, which I will just cuddle.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, Amy. This is such an honor. I love the Writer Center. You all have been such an amazing supporter of me. I've been teaching at the Writer Center for a while, so it's just this is really just such an honor. I'm just so grateful. I'll read the first poem to kind of give you the starting point, and then I'll read the inciting incident so you can kind of see where things are going to go and maybe get a taste of the action. So the first one is called The First Time. The first time I broke down in front of anyone was in the middle of the evil place, Walmart. All the people and noise pricked inside my head like 100 shirt tags. It was a Saturday and the aisles were crowded. People yelled. The overhead music crackled. Some smell like sour milk spilled through the air and turned my stomach. And Mom wanted me to decide on a new pair of jeans from the millions of racks. All of a sudden, the whole store, screaming kids and stiff AC air, was folding in on me like two tight hugs from strangers. I ran, locked myself in one of the changing stalls. Mom banged on the door, but I balled up on the dirty tile floor and cried and hyperventilated till my head stopped spinning and my eyes dried enough for me to see. When I opened the door, Mom pulled me out of the store, ditching our groceries by a mannequin in reds, whites, and blues. Once we got in the van, she locked the doors. She let me cry. She opened the glove compartment and gave me a pack of cookies. I always keep some goodies aside for a bad day, she said. But when I calmed down, Mom said, Selah Godfrey, never ever cry in the middle of a store. Always hold it in till you make it back to the car. That became the first rule for my list on how to be a normal person. So from that beginning, you get a sense that Selah is a girl who has this misbelief that she has to keep everything in. And Selah's autistic, so every little sensory detail in the world is constantly attacking her. And so she's trying to keep it all in. She's trying to keep on a normal mask. And at some point she can't anymore. And that's what I'll read next. The incident. Study hall is supposed to be quiet, a break from all the noise and talking, to work on homework or draw, or just sit and think. But the other kids are loud, throwing heavy words around the room like anvils. Even if I don't want to listen to their conversations, my ears attach to every single word like magnets, and the heavy words settle into my forehead until they shape into a massive headache. I try to hide in drawing. I try to keep my mouth shut and be the good kid people think I am. But the busy halls and the hot, crowded room and the memory of my rude neighbors and the warm, itchy uniform and the squeaking dry erase markers poke at me like thumbtacks all the time, and I'm sick of it. I tell myself to push it all inside until I can get home. Then Addie leans over behind me and starts braiding my hair. Why? I suddenly feel her fingers in my hair like electric spiders, crawling and pinching and taking over my whole head. She doesn't even ask first or anything. I can't think. I can't gather words. My body takes over. I scream and turn, and my arm moves without me thinking, hitting her like she's a fly buzzing around my head. But my hit is too hard. Blood runs out Addie's nose, and the whole room goes still.
Just giving that a beat to land. Okay, Meg, in your own words, writer center question, who the heck are you?
So I'm a creative writing instructor. I teach at the Writer Center and other places. I'm a poet. I'm a kidlit novelist. I am a Fire Emblem and Pokemon enthusiast. I am an autistic person. I'm a Christian. Yeah, those are some things about me, I guess.
All right, and for somebody who put in the chat that you can't wait to read the rest, buy the book, and then, yes. So let's talk about this book. So the structure, I don't read a lot of middle grade work. I was thrilled to read this. So describe the structure.
So that's an interesting question, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to answer it, because what's interesting about this book is it's a novel in verse. So it is told through poems, but it has that narrative spine of a novel. And I know for my editor, that was really important. She said, I know it's in verse, but I still want this to have a strong plot. I want it to be strongly paced like any prose middle grade novel. So the structure, if you're thinking about, like, if we were outlining this, it would have the same narrative beats of a typical novel. I use Save the Cat. The Save the Cat writes a novel model. So,
okay, excuse me, I'm going to interrupt and
No,
ask
you're
you to
good.
just explain that. I love Save the Cat, but just to give a bit of, for the audience here, a bit of explanation of that.
Yeah, so Save the Cat writes a novel. That's well, there's this initial Save the Cat model, and there's a specific kind of adaptation of that model from Jessica Brody. Oh, and we've got somebody holding up that book. Thank you. Oh, hi, Laura. It's awesome to see you. Laura's holding up Save the Cat Writes a Novel by Jessica Brody, which is a fantastic book I recommend for any novelist, especially if you are character driven and don't enjoy plot as much like me. It's a way of thinking about plot that's accessible, and it just kind of says, here's the bones of every story. They all have the same basic kind of thing. So, I use that model, good, different. You can map it out with that model. So it's there, but each scene or each moment, is a little poem. It's built from poems. That's what the flesh is. So yeah, I'm thinking about it like a novel, but the way I put it together is a little different than a novel. We don't have the same, like, I don't know, typically, I guess 30 to 40 chapters maybe is normal for a prose novel. This is,
Okay, so I sent you questions in advance, but I'm going to jump around among them because this is so interesting to me. So, and also the word normal, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, so you're a poet. How did you do this? How did you take the idea? Tell me your secrets. How did you turn these poems into this incredible story? And I get Save the Cat gives you the structure, right? If you're a pantser, someone who goes by the seat of the pants, Save the Cat gives you a structure. But how did you do this? How did you go from an idea to a story with an arc?
Yeah, so it started with a single poem. I was overstimulated in COVID. I think I had just braved to Aldi's when the worst of this was happening, and I just was so overstimulated, I started writing a poem. And I was in writing the poem, I remembered a memory where a girl in grade school started braiding my hair in the recess line, without asking or anything, and how that surprised me. But then the poem morphed as I wrote it, as sometimes happens when we write, and it was no longer me. It became this character who hit that girl that was braiding her hair, and that surprised me. And that made me ask questions. I went, who is this character? Why did she hit her? What happens next? And so then I knew it wasn't an isolated poem. This was a larger story. And so then I had to kind of work backwards to kind of start from the beginning. And it took a while to find the right beginning. But then I just wrote it like it, to me, the process, I don't know how to describe it. It's just a process that makes the most sense to me. I also write prose, but I tend to hop around and I tend to write in little moments because of my poetry background. So this was the same thing where I kind of have a end point I'm reaching towards, or maybe in this case, I knew what the inciting incident was, right? So then my first question was, well, what's the setup? And I wrote setup poems.
Okay. So let's slow down just to back it up. So you knew what the moment was, the inciting incident of, like, this girl braided my hair, and I had what is considered by other people not an acceptable reaction, but is actually a normal reaction. Or I don't want to use the word normal. So you write this poem, and which way did you go?
So the first poem was the inciting incident. Then I tended to work backwards, though I'm not sure I ever really work linearly. Especially a novel in verse really invites me to not work linearly. Like I'm working on another one right now, and I just write the poems as I get them for my first draft. I'm like, I discover a thing, and then I go, oh, that might be the lowest of low. And oh, look, that might be, part of the setup. And then as I gather enough pieces, I can start maybe building enough connections that then I can start from the beginning and fill in the gaps. But I don't write in order, or I don't tend to.
So, sorry. I have so many things to ask you. So I see your questions in the chat. I'm going to get to them. All right. So I still want to understand how you had this inside, because I think the book it has a very traditional, it has a very strong narrative arc. So how did you go from, did you write multiple poems? And also I want to know, because each page, readers or soon to be readers, has a different poem with a different title and different spacing. That's my question. This is my question.
I mean, let me know if this is actually answering your question, but I mean, I don't really even know how to answer it. I just write poems.
Well, I didn't ask it very well, so.
It's okay. I mean, yeah, like I write, for this one, I knew the inciting incident, then I had to just write a lot of poems to figure out where my beginning was. There was a lot of trial and error of what elements interested me, it's throwing things and seeing what sticks at the wall. Like,
okay.
Because I have that pantser tendency that's always there, but for verse novels, it's so much easier because I can write a few poems and see, because often they'll start leading to each other. Like,
okay.
Oh yeah.
No, so pantser versus plotter, do you want to explain what that is?
Yes. So pantsers are people that fly by the seat of their pants. They just write ideas as they come. Plotters like to think out everything in advance. This was a very seat of the pants novel. And I followed what decisions my character made that were surprising. So, once I had that hitting Addie moment, I went, oh, that's interesting. And then, once you have a narrative moment like that, there's going to be consequences. So then you just kind of write a poem each and you follow the consequences. And this one, often it kind of just happened. I went, okay, what's the next decision? And they link together as little chains. So I don't feel like I have a great answer for your question. I feel bad.
Well, my question, Meg, was my hands around my head. So in fairness, there's a question in the chat. What are the sticky notes on your wall? Part of an outline. So I think that relates to the plotter or pantser of, like, if you're saying you're a pantser, what's the plot on your wall?
So let me explain what this is. So in the back, this is my possibilities wall. So this is not an outline for a single story. These are little spurts of ideas that interest me. So when I'm trying to get a new idea for a story, if my agent says, give me some pitches, something you might want to write, I can look at these and kind of put them together to make a pitch. And so for the plotter pantser question, I'd say I am more of a plantser now. I use the save the cat thing. I try and kind of get a general vague idea, give myself a little compass, a little map, and I will probably go in different directions as I write. I really need that surprise. I'm working on right now a book, and my character stole a trophy from the girl's house that she was sleeping over at. And I went, that's interesting. What's going to happen from that? And then, I'm following that. And it's totally not what I feel like we still haven't gotten to what I actually outlined of what we were going to write about. And we'll see if we get there or not. I'm interested in the trophy thing. So we're just going to kind of follow that for now. And that's what happened with Selah too.
So another question I saw is the Save the Cat model. I would recommend you just look it up. It's well known. It is there's Save the Cat, the original version, which was movies. Save the Cat saves the novel. and it tracks the beats that make so many stories successful. It's not a blueprint, it's the truth. So let's dig into the writing details. Okay, so one of the things I found very powerful about your work is the sensory details. So as a writer, we're told to use like all 5 senses, right? What do you use? Like use the 5 senses. But given that autistic people have sensory issues, I found that particularly soaring. It's soared. The word soared. SOARD, not sword like. So can you talk about sensory issues for people who are autistic, and then how, talk about it from your perspective as autistic, your perspective as a writer of sensory things, and like how that all integrates to really make this crescendo, in my opinion, work.
Thank you. I love that question.
Thank
because as an autistic person, there's a few things that many of us have. I won't say everyone because we're all really different, but there's often we have trouble with introspection, especially with bodily awareness, sensory awareness. Like I will get very hot and that will make me very anxious and headachy and upset, but often I'm not aware that I'm getting to that point until I'm like exploding. So the past several years have been a lot of work of getting that introspective awareness of like, this is what's happening in my body and what I should do about it. So I say that because I think that connects to how I describe things as a poet. When I go to the doctor and I have some sort of physical sensation, I don't tend to describe it. Like people will say, is it a sharp pain? Is it a throbbing pain? And I'm like, I don't understand what those words mean. It feels like there are pop rocks in my ears. Like I describe things more as if it was a poem, and my doctor goes like, I don't know what to do with that. So it's natural.
I just want to interrupt for a second because that's so much related to your work. Can you just just if you could, I'm sorry, if you can just talk about the experience with the doctor one more time.
Yeah. Like, with my doctor, or I know with my husband, I'd be like, I'm in pain. And he's like, what kind of pain? Where is the pain? And I'm like, I don't know. My body hurts, or I don't know. It feels like there are pop rocks in my ear. I don't know. There's, I can't even think of a description, but I feel like I go to poetic language because I don't quite know how to articulate it in the way neurotypical people would. Because my husband would be like, is it throbbing? Is it sharp? Is it this kind of thing? And I go, I don't understand what those descriptors mean. It feels like this. And so, yeah, it's like poetic language is more accessible for me for articulating and understanding the world around me than the terms maybe that we typically use.
Okay, that's so to me beautiful and powerful. Like, yeah, it's throbbing. Well, what does it mean? It's like there's a mariachi band in my head.
Right. Well, which is great as a poet, because then you're like, that's interesting. Let me write that. It's not so great when you're trying to get treatment, because like my husband would go, I don't know how to help pop rocks, like I don't know what we do about that. So I've learned to kind of figure out language on that, but I feel like I'm so grateful to poetry because it gave me language when I didn't know how to describe things. It gave me a way to have a voice and explain things.
So I want to go to a particular question that I wrote out for you, which is putting on your writer hat. We're often exhorted to include sensory details from all the 5 senses in our writing. And a couple of examples from your work is, which we were just talking about, all the people and noise prick inside my head like 100 short tags. I suddenly feel her fingers in my hair like electric spiders. Every curse word like a sting of bees. And I know we're talking about this already, but I just want to hear a little more about the intersection of writing as an autistic woman and a talented poet, of how you bring those sensory details so vividly to life. So you're saying it's what actually comes into your head?
Yeah, it's not complicated. It's like, this book was the easiest thing to write because I really just was like, how do I feel? Let me just like blah that out. So it's like, it's not like I'm really, sometimes I would dig for something as specific as possible, like the shirt tags. I think it was something else before and it felt a little bit cliche. And so I was like, how can we get that more specific? What's something that really like grinds my gears? Well, okay, a shirt tag. So sometimes it is that poetic digging deep to try and find the right image. And I love the, like when I found electric spiders, I was like, that's exactly like what I'm trying to say. So sometimes it is taking that poetic pause to think, is this the right way of saying it? But yeah.
So on a personal note, when were you diagnosed?
So I was diagnosed in COVID in the summer.
So you were already a poet.
Yes, I've been a poet for a while. Yeah.
So interesting. Okay. So all right, back to the book, and you and I should have coffee later because I have so many things to talk about.
Do it.
Okay, so you have a couple of themes that you weave throughout the book. Let's talk about a few. You talk about the role dragons play in Selah's story, and obnoxious neighbors. So for the people who haven't read your book yet but are about to buy them, talk about dragons and obnoxious neighbors and how they serve a role. Maybe it's not themes as much as, I don't know, whatever literary word they are.
Yeah. So it's funny when you start a project, okay, at least when I start a project, I don't think, okay, there's going to be a dragon motif and I'm going to keep bringing up dragons. Or at least when I try to do that, it doesn't work because I've been trying to do it with a current book. I'm like, I'm going to bring up this metaphor of how everyone has brown leaves. And so there's going to be all these plant motifs. And, you know, when I'm going in thinking that, it's not really organically happening. So anyway, the dragon thing, it's not like I went in with that motif. With the neighbors, I didn't necessarily go in with that motif. I went in with that detail because I was thinking what things really made me struggle with my sensory detail issues. What sort of things, you know, especially if you're a kid, you've no control over. How can I capture that neighbor?
Okay. So that's the thing is Selah she doesn't have control, but the story is about her gaining control against her mom, who isn't willing to see her, and the principal who wants to sort of squash her down. So
yeah, well, and when you're in middle grade particularly, I think something that's so powerful about it is you're going back into a point in time where you don't really have any control. A middle schooler, you can't drive yet, but you have this awareness. So yeah, I was definitely trying to think, and with my autism, you know, I haven't felt like I had autonomy, and that's part of what made it so difficult. It never occurred, like I had a lot of issues with a roommate in college. It never occurred to me to just have a conversation with her to say, oh, could you turn your light off? Or, oh, could you be quiet? I can't sleep. I just thought you have to just put up with things. So that was something I really wanted to capture in this book, is that you can feel powerless, but you have the right to, you know, have a conversation with somebody. You have the right to voice something. And, you know, there's certain ways where you can potentially take control. So.
Okay, so that in the book manifests as Selah's rules. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so I know I felt this way as a kid, and maybe other people too, that there were certain kind of unspoken rules. I think especially as a female autistic person, you know, there's the social rules of being in female society, and then there's these rules of being in neurotypical society. So I had kind of these, I thought they were rules. Like I kind of in my head, you know, went, oh, you don't do this, you don't talk about these things. People will probably not be interested. People like, and so yeah, and I tried to abide by those rules, and nobody ever inherently taught me those. I think I just I thought I was learning them around me, and it was definitely misunderstanding the environment to some degree. I mean, maybe
right, but sorry.
No, yeah, go ahead.
But Selah is a dragon, or she thinks she's a dragon.
Yeah. So the rules don't work. They're a wrong way of fixing the problem.
So, all right, the word wrong, right? Take the word right out that I just said. The word wrong is a theme in this story of damaged, broken, not correct. She feels like a dragon. She wants to be a dragon. No one wants to talk about dragons at her age, but you're trying to push the story forward with her grappling with right and wrong at an age where kids have no idea what's right and wrong anyway. All my questions are going to be just this, Meg. I'm just going to do this.
You're good. I'll just do my best to respond. and this may be tangential to what you're saying, but what it's getting me to think about is, for me, the when somebody kind of explained that, and maybe this was Jessica Brody, that a way you can approach story as a character trying to solve a problem the wrong way until they hit their lowest of low and they realize that didn't work and they have to reevaluate and solve their problem the right way. So that's, I think, the way I was thinking of. I mean, I guess, like you say, there's a motif of kind of right and wrong and a lot of different ways of what it means to be a right or wrong person. But for me, a lot of it was just, you're different. And that's not objectively right or wrong. It just is. And, there's a right or wrong way to deal with that. And I know for me, I dealt with it the wrong way for so long. So my hope is readers, these kids can read this and realize they don't have to deal with this the wrong way, that there are tools to deal with it the right way.
Right. So I mean, you talk about the right way, the wrong way, that has the neurotypical framework layered on it, right? So, all right, I'm going to turn the page a moment, literally, and go to the page, which is the beautiful layout. So you chose to write this in verse, and I mean, I read this book in one gulp, and then I read it for another gulp. So please talk about your choice to write it in verse and how these, the spacing. So for instance, I just want to bring the participants in here. There's a section, a poem called Gaps. And it's
you want me to put it on the screen, by the way, because I have the.
If you could do that faster than I can, that would be great.
Okay.
So it's about Selah's gaps between her feelings, between herself and her grandfather. And when Meg wrote it, there are physical. Oh, there we go. There we go. Yes, yes. Look at that. Look at that. Beautiful. Look at the gaps. Can you read that to us, please?
Of course. Gaps.
And then talk about how this, what this means within the context and how it fits in with how you structured this thing.
Absolutely. Gaps. I don't know what my dad likes to do, if he likes to draw like me and mom, or ride bikes like Pop. I don't know what he likes to eat, if he likes dragons, or if he'd sit in the woods and talk to the trees around our house when he was upset like I do. Mom doesn't talk about him much, and I was too young to remember him. Little gaps of him sit in the corners of our house, the third chair at the dining room table, the walls where the paint is darker because there used to be things hung there. The cutout parts of old photos in our album, where all that's left of him is the space around his body. If I'm honest, I don't think about him much. Why would I? You can't miss someone you never knew. At least that's what I tell myself. So, it's funny because I don't feel like I get to choose whether I write in prose or verse. It happens in prose or verse, typically. This came to me in poems. Selah talked to me in poems. So I wrote in poems. There's a few exceptions to that, but that's typically my rule. But once I discovered this was poems, I got to have a lot of fun because, as we've said, I have a background in poetry. I have tools in my toolbox. And so when I was thinking about, I became aware as I wrote that there was a mom and there was a grandfather, but there was an absence of a father. And in poetry, the absences can be almost more interesting than the presence. And so I thought about the idea of gaps and absences. What are the details that are absent in her scene? And so I liked being able to use literal caesuras and that white space on the page to mimic the content. So that's the fun thing about poetry, is you can use the form. And I think I have the opinion that some poems and novels in verse do it a little too on the nose. They're like, it's a wave, so we're going to do a wave shape. And, sometimes that can work. But I think there's like these sneaky tools, like all these possibilities. And so like you can do a shape that can be cool. But there's so many other things we can do too. And this was just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that I want to explore in future books. But yeah.
So can you pull up in the hallway after school?
Why is it oh, there we go. Yes.
Okay, so can you share this, please? But first give the context. Because I'm so glad you pulled up the screen, because it would take me 95 minutes to do that. But to have the visual of how the form impacts the reader's experience. So please, if you could give the context and then just share this piece.
Sure. Frankly, I'm trying to even remember contextually where this is. This is towards the end, right? This is when Addie's talking to her mom. So, okay,
She's in trouble. She's in trouble.
Right. So Selah gets in trouble at school, and Addie, because she hit Addie, and so Addie's mom doesn't like that. But this is where we start seeing Addie maybe stand up for Selah. Is that adequate context, do you think?
Absolutely. It's like, and what I saw was like the structurally, like the center was like what's going on, and it goes dialogue.
Yes, there's a few times in this book that I get to use justification on the page for dialogue, which I love because I think it's really hard juggling speakers when you're multiple speakers, especially when you're writing a poem. And I feel like I've read poems and verse novels where it was confusing of who's speaking. So getting to, and I actually kind of stole this from April Naoko Heck. I remember she used justification in her poems Conversation with My Mother. And that opened up to me, like, you can use the page to show who's speaking. And so that was a tool I really enjoyed. And so this is an example. Did you want me to read it? Or
absolutely, that's exactly what I meant. Is like it's like the justification of how you structured this, which, you know, in a traditional novel, you don't have the benefit of this beauty. So please.
Absolutely. In the hallway after school, while we wait to talk to my teachers, Addie's mom marches into the office in her designer boots. It's impossible to not overhear her, demanding to know why I'm still here. But it's also impossible to miss Addie's voice, jumping in, loud as usual. Why shouldn't she stay? Why do you not like Selah so much? Well, sweetie, she hit you. She wasn't trying to hit me, and she apologized. She's helped me with math, and she's my friend. Aren't you being pretty unreasonable? Pebble Creek is supposed to be safe. That's why I chose this school for you. It has standards, but it's not safe if, Mom, Pebble Creek is only unsafe if you're scared of kids like Selah. Addie's mom doesn't say anything to that. The whole office goes quiet. I don't think Principal Merkert or anyone else at Pebble Creek can say anything to that either.
Thank you. If you could stop sharing screen. So perfect. So to me, as a prose writer who also enjoys poetry, to see the power of the layout was really something.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to get into the chat in a minute, but how did you make the artistic decisions about layout and fonts? And there's nothing after that, just layouts and fonts.
Yeah, so like I said, I think there's cool tools in your toolbox as a poet. And so I definitely wanted to try to utilize those. I think when we talked about this in exchange beforehand, you'd mentioned the example of there's the word big that's in really big letters. And it's one of the only times we really
one time.
So one time, and that idea came from The Crossover, which is a phenomenal novel in verse, absolutely recommend. And he uses playing with the shape and the size of the font. But I guess I had my MFA poetry professors in my head. I feel like if I had done that any more times, Stan Plumley would be like, this is contrived, Meg, you know? So I was really trying to think, making sure the function of the form was purposeful, necessary, and that wasn't gimmicky, because I felt like I used the example of the wave, and I don't want to be mean. If people like shape forms. There's times for that, it's great. But every time I would think of using something like that, I just heard it stand in my head being like gimmicky. So, I wanted to make sure it really felt like the poem absolutely needed that. And that if I showed it to Stan, like, see, Stan, the poem has to have that. And he'd be like, okay. So,
Right. But as a reader with no MFA and I'm a writer, but I don't have an MFA. I don't have experience in poetry except what I read and YA. To me, I don't have his voice in my head.
Yeah, that's yeah.
So,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say something else laudatory. So, but as you write a book in verse, where's the issue of like what you feel is gimmicky versus writing he said, she said?
That's a great question. And I don't know if I have a great answer for it. I think every writer has to do what they think works, and somebody else might do that and they feel confident with it. My rule is just if I feel like I'd have to, like, if I can feel confident explaining why the poem needs this. Having those voices in the head, that can be a benefit that maybe isn't a good thing either, because in the end, I need to write what I think works. And there's probably more tools I could have utilized. But I guess the questions that I was trying to think of, will this distract or will this uplift the content? Will this, where is this bringing the reader's focus? Will this help the reader, be immersed in what's literally happening? Or are they going to think, oh, cool, look at that shape, or, oh, cool, look how big that is. But,
Right.
Or is that making you feel the big feeling? Does that one moment where it's that really draw our attention to how big that feels? And so you feel Selah's perspective, then that's doing the work I want it to do. So it's really just, we have these tools. Are they doing the work I want them to do? And gimmicky is if I go, I don't know, that seemed kind of neat. That's all I can describe for it. There's probably a better way of describing that.
No, that was great. I have one more question and then we'll jump to the chat. But when you talk about rules, right? How does that fit in with Selah's rules?
So rules as in, what I'm thinking about for the poem, or what kind of rules?
Just like you're talking about external structures, and your book is about someone struggling with that. So what I'm going to say intersectionality, but how does that intersect?
It's a good question. I don't know
Thank
if
you.
I thought much about that, and now I kind of want to.
We can go to other questions and come back to that, because that was a sideball, but side curve.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you point that out. Like, I think maybe the form then, enhances the content or reinforces the idea that, I'm somebody that values rules, but also struggles like Selah, do this work? Does this make sense? And so it's funny that you say that, because now I'm like, oh, if I was still editing, I would probably think about form even more with that lens of, maybe we have more regimented, structured quatrains for most of the poems. And then at some point we start going into, a lot more free of forms. Now that you say that, I'm like, oh, that's a missed opportunity. That would be kind of neat.
I know. I mean, to me, it's not a missed opportunity at all. It's a brilliant construction of, like, it raises the question of what form do you bring? What form does Selah bring as an autistic character? What do you bring as an autistic writer? Like, whose structures are these?
Yeah, and I think it's, like you say, the narrative is her starting with trying to appropriate these outside structures and put them in herself. That doesn't work. And so in the end, she has to kind of figure out the rules of how she actually works and how to reconcile that with the reality of the world around her. So I think there's kind of a coming to a healthy middle ground by the end. And so I don't know if the form really actually reflects that, but that would be kind of neat if the form did more reflecting of that. But yeah,
I mean, I think it does. But
okay, cool. Great.
I'm going to turn to the chat, and thank you for people who put capital words saying question. Okay. Sally asks, I was once told that adults should consider reading YA books because they have to be really good to keep the attention of young people. That's interesting to me. Do you agree?
I've never heard that, but I really like it. I've heard people
I
say
do
that kind
too.
of, yeah, and I think I've heard people say that with picture books, particularly because it's so small. People go, "Oh, that'd be so easy to write."
Ugh.
And you have to
Try it.
write tightly. You have to write
I
differently.
could do that.
So yeah, like YA in middle grade, I think like kidlit in general, I think it's a different challenge. And as a poet, I like that challenge of, tightness, immediacy, making sure we're still moving while not forsaking craft.
So speaking of craft, the next question is about the Save the Cat. I would suggest you look up Save the Cat. Save the Cat reads a novel. It's a great analysis of what works in literature. Sticky notes we covered. Question: how did you identify the beginning of your story?
That's a great question. And I remember it was really hard. I tend to have a few months at the beginning where I'm just fighting to find a beginning that interests me. And eventually it just feels like a lot of it's trial and error. You can't know till you write some stuff and you realize that doesn't work. But once I wrote the first time poem in that Walmart, I knew that was the one. And I think my rule now is I like trying to write my beginning in scene where we meet the first character and they have some sort of conflict, some sort of interesting tension. And, thinking about Selah and her sensory issues, where's the worst possible place I could throw her? Well, basically Walmart, right? And she has like a misbelief there. So like,
So share what her misbelief is, please.
what her mom says of, never cry in public, hold it until you get back to the car. The misbelief is you aren't allowed to communicate your emotions. You aren't allowed to express your emotions in a public place. You have to save them till you're safe at home.
And that assumes that home is safe.
It does. And that's specifically what Selah's misbelief is, because home is her safe spot. So obviously, like, that could be a very different misbelief for someone else. But for Selah specifically, her home is her safe spot, but then she doesn't really feel safe anywhere else.
Meg has been an instructor, mentor, and marketing advisor to me. This is from Lee Woodman. Please ask her how she pays so much attention to other people's questions and motives. Is it easier for you to intuitively understand other people more than yourself?
Hi, Lee. I love seeing you here. Thank you so much for being here and asking that wonderful question. And I feel like that's a thinker. That's one I kind of want to sit with for a while. I think my rules have made it, the rules I struggle with, a benefit of them is I think that I really desire to be thoughtful of other people. And I really am always striving to think, what would help other people, what would, be meaningful to them. And I find great joy and meaning in that. And I think that's part of why I delight in being an instructor and mentor. I'm glad that it sounds like I understand people's questions and motives. I often feel so baffled of trying to figure out how other people are thinking. So I'm glad that I've succeeded in that way, at least in this situation. So I don't know if I necessarily intuitively understand other people. I just try and think of what would be helpful for me. So yeah, if somebody's very different than me, then I'm probably struggle more of being helpful, unfortunately, but yeah.
Let's get to a couple of publishing questions. How did this get from an idea to a book? What's your path to publication? And
Wait,
also, Pitch Wars, Dish.
So those are three questions, Amy. Where do you want me to start?
1, 2, 3.
You want me to do, okay.
How did this go from an idea to a book?
So it started with that one poem. I had no idea what I was doing, but I followed the fun. And eventually I had a beginning, middle, and end. And then it was a book. So I don't have a very interesting story for this one. It's just I wrote it and it happened. But I guess the publication story-wise, I initially queried it, didn't really get much response. Pitch Wars opened up for submissions. I thought I'm probably not eligible for Pitch Wars.
Can you explain what that is for people who don't know?
Yes, Pitch Wars was, unfortunately, no longer exists.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's really sad.
Its compadres probably do, but
It's such a labor of love. So much love to Brenda Drake for, doing it in the first place. It was a mentorship program. You would submit an application, somebody would select you as a mentor potentially, you'd work on editing your book, and there would be a
all
show.
on Twitter, all on Twitter.
No, not all on Twitter.
No?
That's a common misconception.
Well, I specialize in that.
I thought it was all on Twitter for a while too. Yeah, so it's actually mostly via email, but then on the site they would have this showcase, and it would be talked about a lot on Twitter, which is I think why everyone thought it was on Twitter. But then agents could look and get interest. So that escalated things very quickly for me. The funny story is that I applied for Pitch Wars. You pick which mentors you want to be considered for. And I looked at the applications. Most of them didn't seem like they wanted novels in verse. And I was like, I don't know. We'll just kind of throw it in there. I sent it to a few people. The mentor that selected me was not one of the 3 I selected. One of the mentors I selected said, this is amazing, but I don't do novels in verse. It sent a Facebook message to all the other mentors and said, somebody needs to mentor this girl. Who would like to do it? And somebody else reached out. So the moral of that story is take advantage of every opportunity, send things, even if you have no idea what will happen from them. And things will probably happen in a very different way than you plan. So anyway, I got into that. I got like 25 agent requests or something and ended up getting 8 offers. I mean, it just it exploded. Nothing I ever got from querying ever in my life. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity. And while Pitch Wars is gone, I believe there are other mentorship programs. So I encourage folks to look around and see which ones are still around, because it's just, I can't stress how valuable those kind of experiences are. What have I missed? There was another question.
I have lots of questions, but I'm going to go to the chat. So now that you're done with your first book, are you finding it difficult to draft the second book? Do you have second book syndrome? And second book syndrome to me is, I know how to write that book. I don't know how to write the next one.
Yes. So that is every book syndrome. Every book is a different problem. There's a reason why we say second book syndrome though, because there's this book that's out in the world. And then you have all this, you realize people are looking at you. So the next thing you write after that, which isn't always your second book. For me, this is an embarrassing number of attempts. So
I see you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it's still, there's that weird thing about writing the next thing after something is out in the world, because now I know what my agent looks for. I know what my editor looks for. And so I hear them whispering, in my ears while I'm working now, which I actually really like my agent and editor. So it's not really a bad thing. They're kind of guiding me. I feel like they're kind of guiding me through the process, but yeah, it's hard. And what was really hard for me was writing my first pitch. So I'm working on another book right now, but what was hardest is that once you have an editor, they don't typically look at a next full manuscript. And I don't know why we don't talk about this. I feel like I wish somebody had told me this. So what you need to do is you write the beginning pages and you write a full synopsis, which is somebody that's not a plotter. It's really scary and hard to figure out what your whole book's going to be.
I don't know. Ask me in 2 years.
Right. But I had to do it in like a month because my editor responded it later than we expected. And so for us to be on the certain timeline that we wanted, it meant, okay, now you have a month to kind of figure out what this novel is. And obviously that was like a self-imposed kind of timeline. Obviously it was, there was more flexibility, but it was like, oh my goodness, how the heck do I figure out what's happening in my book? And so that was particularly hard for me. There's a whole challenge with drafting other new things. And since this book has come out, I've drafted other things, but I think that was particularly hard because I just hadn't done it before. So now that I've done it, it feels a little less scary each time. I'm kind of figuring it out with other things. I don't know what, hi, Ranjita. That's lovely to see that you're here. Yeah, okay, yes, I do have some sense of second book syndrome. I feel you. I'm there with you, girl. I don't necessarily have great advice, except that it will pass. Just keep writing, keep doing it.
I mean, that's the advice, right? I have a couple more questions. One, we like to ask all our authors, what's a question you really wish someone would ask you about what you've written that no one has asked yet?
I love this question, Amy, and I have been like kept awake at night trying to figure out how to answer it because I feel like I don't have I wish I had some wonderful, insightful answer. And I don't.
There could be nothing. I mean, I didn't invent this question. We didn't invent this question, but I think it's really interesting of like,
Yes.
did you put, I don't know, a secret code in there? Is there? No, just, I mean, is there anything that you thought about when you wrote that no one asks you about? And if the answer is no, then that's okay too.
The thing is, I don't always know what I want to say until somebody asks a question. And then I go, oh, I have things to say about that. So you know what, Amy, like, I'm going to sit with this question and like 2 weeks from now, I'm going to have like a really great answer for it. And I'm going to email you and I'm gonna be like, here's my answer to that question. At this moment, I don't have a great answer to it. No, I'm quite happy with the questions I've got, but I'm sure there's other things I'd like to say that I just am not even aware of. And I'll think of it later.
Well, if there is, send us, 200 words and it'll be a blog post. So,
Yeah, sure.
So my final question, and then I'll go back and see if there's a question I missed in the chat, which I may have, but what is one piece of advice you have for writers just starting out?
Keep writing. Get to the end of the first thing you're writing, because that's the hardest part, is getting to the end of something.
All right, I'm gonna ask a question which I had to answer for myself, but after 7 years, but I'm gonna ask you, how do you know when you're at the end?
It's a great question, and is when I hear a lot and I don't know if I have a great answer. And I guess there's a question of what's the end versus what's finished. For me, I am proud and big-headed. So I write a thing and I tend to think this is the best thing ever written. It's perfect. And then people have to kind of get me in line. Like my agent has to go, actually, this like makes no sense so far. Like I just did that recently with some proposal pages. And she's like, what is going on? Like you need a little bit more context. So I tend to know it's finished more when someone like my agent says, I love it. This makes sense. When I hear things like that, I go, okay, we're good. Ending wise though, one thing I really loved from the Save the Cat that I take is this idea of mirroring, that your opening scene and your ending scene in some way reflect one another. So for example, when I did Good Different and I was trying to figure out where's the end, I thought about, well, where did it start? It started at Walmart with this misbelief with mom saying, don't cry, hold it in till the car. So where do I end it? They're entering Pebble Creek to talk to the principal about accommodations, holding hand in hand, and Selah tells mom, it's okay if we cry. So there's that mirroring that we got the mom and the girl together, and we've got a mirroring of growth. We didn't have, Selah did not just not change the entire book, she grew. So she doesn't still have that misbelief. She's learned it's okay if we cry. It's okay if people see that. There's nothing to be ashamed of. And so that's how I knew it was the end, because it had that mirroring.
I will take any other questions, but otherwise that's a wrap, people.
There was a question about my courses. So I did want to do a shameless plug and put my link in the chat.
Oh, I told you I was mediocre at questions. So, oh, okay. Do you write for a living full time aside from instruction?
Oh, sorry.
Was that the question?
No, well, I can answer that one too, but I saw a question, which classes are you teaching right now? So
Thank you. Answer all the questions I didn't see.
Okay, I will. Great.
Please, and thank you.
For the classes I'm teaching right now, check out that link I just put in the chat. That's got not just my classes, it's also got like my launch. I've got a launch Politics and Prose on Tuesday. So if you're in the DC area, come say hi. I would love that. But I also have my courses. I think I actually just signed my contract for Writer Center courses. And I think I just plugged them in on the website. So I don't know if their registration is open yet, but you can see what is to come. And I know I've got a few with writingworkshops.com that aren't on there yet. So please make sure to check that out periodically. I definitely for the summer, I want to have quite a few with poetry. And I think there's a Kidlit workshop that I'm starting soon, and a agents and editors one. So please stay tuned for those. And regarding Joy's question, I am trying to figure out what works for me right now. I got a decent advance for my book. And right now I'm in the experiment of, can we keep that train going? Can we keep selling books and get money for it? Because that'd be really cool. But I also love teaching, so I do want to still be doing teaching. And so the balance kind of changes each semester of how much am I spending writing, how much am I spending teaching. I also, do tutoring at Anne Arundel Community College. So the balance of each of those things kind of shifts each semester. I guess my opinion is, unless you are in a very, very unique situation, I have found that having something besides writing is not only financially great, but it is emotionally great, because when I have tried to put all the weight of the money on my writing, I stress myself out and my writing is not as good. I find when I have something else like teaching, it helps me not put all that pressure on writing to do something that I can't control, because in the end, all I can control is writing the things and sending them out. I can't control if they sell. I can't control so many things about it, how much money it will make, if it will make any money, will my agent or my editor decide to become a monk? Things just constantly change. They're both amazing. I hope and assume that they will stay in publishing many, many, many years, but it's just such a weird world. That's the point. It's just everything is constantly changing and out of your control. So I do a little bit of both, and I will probably continue to do a little bit of both for the rest of my career. Oh, there's more questions.
There are more questions. So I'm going to call this the official end of the Writer Center Craft Chat. If you have a few minutes to spend, there are a couple of, there's a writer question, there's a personal question, if you have time or willingness, but I want to say thank you so much officially as the end of the recording. Thank you so much. I love this book. I love talking to you. I think this book will change people's lives. I really believe it's a powerful experience, and I'm so glad you wrote it, and I'm so glad you shared it.
Well, thank you so much, Amy. Thank you for your enthusiasm, and thank you for being wonderful, wonderful questions, and for having me tonight.